We've all encountered individuals who sap the energy from a room the instant they enter. It's simple to tag them as harmful, negative, or troublesome. However, the most intelligent approach to handling those who appear harmful isn't to accuse or erect barriers, but to begin with something much more potent and challenging: empathy. You see, no one decides one morning, "Today, I'll be harmful." No child dreams of becoming someone everyone avoids. Harmful behavior is usually a symptom, not a character trait. It's the external display of unresolved pain, insecurity, fear, or even desperation. If we're truthful with ourselves and delve deep enough, we've all had moments when we weren't the most pleasant to be around. There's a tale about a man on a subway with 3 young kids. The children were rowdy, yelling, and disturbing everyone, while the man sat seemingly unaware. Eventually, a passenger lost patience and snapped at the father to control his kids. The man looked up as if waking from a dream and softly said, "I'm sorry, we just came from the hospital. Their mother passed away about an hour ago. I don't know what to do, and I guess they don't either." Instantly, judgment turned into understanding, and frustration transformed into compassion. The individuals we label as harmful are often battling unseen struggles. This doesn't mean we should tolerate or excuse bad behavior, but before we categorize someone, we should pause and ask ourselves a powerful question: what's the story here that I don't know? Approaching harmful people with empathy first isn't about changing them, it's about protecting ourselves from becoming like them. When we meet anger with anger, bitterness with bitterness, we only add more negativity to an already burdened world. Empathy doesn't mean you have to stay or allow mistreatment. It means choosing understanding over judgment as a starting point. Consider the people in your life who are the hardest to deal with. Maybe it's a coworker who criticizes everything, or a family member who always finds the negative. It's easy to call them difficult, but harder to wonder what fear drives their behavior. Perhaps that coworker grew up never feeling good enough, and perfectionism is their survival mechanism. Maybe that family member has been disappointed so often that spotting danger before hope feels like self-protection. When we see the pain behind the behavior, we reclaim our power. We shift from reacting to responding, from being pulled into drama to standing firmly in our values. It's not about fixing or forgiving the other person immediately, but remembering that every human is a complex story, and sometimes the ugliest chapters are written by fear. Empathy isn't weakness, it's strength in its highest form. It says, "I see your pain without absorbing it. I acknowledge your hurt without letting it control me." Empathy builds bridges where judgment builds walls. Sometimes the smartest way to deal with harmful people isn't to shut them out, but to recognize that you don't have to carry their pain with you. Imagine walking through life understanding that hurt people hurt others, that cruelty often reflects inner turmoil, and that when someone lashes out, it's rarely about you. Imagine how much lighter your heart would feel if you didn't take every word or glare personally. Empathy gives you that freedom. It teaches you to see a toxic storm brewing and choose not to step into it. You can acknowledge the storm without losing your footing, look someone in the eyes and see a human trying, often poorly, to deal with their inner mess. This doesn't mean you stay close to everyone or never walk away. It means you walk away without hatred, without carrying their toxicity as a new wound inside yourself. Starting with empathy allows you to keep your integrity and be the person you aspire to be regardless of others' behavior. It turns moments that could harden your heart into opportunities to strengthen it. There's an old saying, "Be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about." When dealing with harmful people, the smartest move is to remember that truth, not to justify bad behavior, but to understand the battlefield we're standing on. Some people will choose to heal, others won't. Some will recognize their toxicity and change, others will double down. That part isn't your responsibility. Your responsibility is to lead with empathy, protect your peace, and know when to step away without losing your humanity. Empathy is a shield, not a sword. It protects you from becoming bitter and keeps you connected to your better self. In a world full of noise, anger, and judgment, choosing to start with empathy might be the smartest and bravest move you can make. There's a moment in every relationship when a line is crossed. Sometimes it's loud and obvious, a shout, a betrayal, a broken promise. Other times it's quiet, a small request ignored, a subtle disrespect, an assumption made without care. Most people don't even notice when it happens, but they feel it deep inside, a tightening in the chest, a moment of discomfort that's easy to shrug off. Those small moments, if left unchecked, grow into patterns, and those patterns become the way we're treated. When dealing with harmful people, the smartest thing isn't to retaliate, lecture, or try to change them. It's to set clear, gentle boundaries, defining quietly but firmly where their behavior ends and your self-respect begins. Most of us are taught that boundaries are about confrontation, shouting matches, ultimatums, door slamming. But real healthy boundaries aren't about anger, they're about clarity. They're about knowing yourself well enough to say what's okay for you and what's not without needing to raise your voice. They're not walls to keep people out, but lines to keep your integrity in. I remember a friend telling me about a colleague who constantly interrupted her in meetings. Every time she tried to speak, he would talk over her, dismiss her ideas, or even claim them as his own. For months, she said nothing, telling herself she was being polite and professional. But inside, she was shrinking, doubting her own value and voice. Finally, she decided to set a boundary, not with anger or blame, but with calm, respectful clarity. The next time he interrupted, she paused, looked him in the eye, and said, "I'm speaking right now. I'll be happy to listen to you when I'm finished." She said it simply, with no drama or heat. Something shifted that day, not just in him, but in her. She realized that boundaries aren't about controlling others, but taking responsibility for how you allow yourself to be treated. With harmful people, this is even more important. They will test your boundaries, push, guilt trip, and manipulate, not necessarily because they're evil, but because their survival has been built around crossing lines to get what they want. If you don't know where your lines are, you'll find yourself pulled into their chaos without realizing it. Setting a boundary doesn't guarantee the other person will like you. Harmful people usually don't, but that's not the point. The point is to make your standards clear, first to yourself, then to them, and do it without hatred, resentment, or the need to explain yourself endlessly. You're not responsible for managing someone else's emotions. When you set a boundary, you're responsible for protecting your own emotional health. That's a hard lesson to learn, especially for those taught that kindness means being endlessly accommodating. But true kindness, the kind that's sustainable, starts with being kind to yourself first. If you don't respect your own time, why would someone else? If you don't value your own peace, why would someone who thrives on drama ever leave you in peace? Boundaries aren't selfish, they're acts of service to yourself and, strangely enough, to the people around you. When you model healthy self-respect, you give others permission to do the same.
Imagine being in a relationship where you don't have to guess what's okay, where the rules are clear and respect is demonstrated daily. That's what boundaries create. They take the confusion out of interactions and bring light into the shadows where toxicity thrives. Of course, setting a boundary isn't a one-time event. It's a practice. It requires consistency, repeating yourself calmly when your line is tested, standing firm without turning cold, and sometimes making the hard choice to step away when someone shows you repeatedly that they have no intention of respecting your space. There's a saying that we teach people how to treat us. Every time you allow disrespect to go unaddressed, you're teaching someone that their behavior is acceptable. But every time you speak up with kindness and firmness, you're teaching them and reminding yourself that you're worthy of respect. You don't need to be angry to be firm or shout to be heard. Gentle doesn't mean weak. Gentle strength is often the hardest kind to maintain. It says, I won't attack or belittle you, but I won't bend to mistreatment either. The smartest way to deal with harmful people isn't to fight their chaos with more chaos, but to stay rooted in your own clarity, knowing where you end and they begin, drawing your lines in sand or stone wherever needed, and doing it not out of fear, but out of love for the person you're becoming. Boundaries aren't about keeping others out, they're about keeping yourself whole. Wholeness, once you find it, is something worth protecting at all costs. There's a moment between stimulus and response, a breath, a choice, most people miss. Something happens, someone says something cruel or does something unfair, and before we know it, we're swept up in a wave of emotion, reacting in ways we regret later. But the smartest way to deal with harmful people isn't to meet fire with fire, but to pause, recognizing that in that tiny space between what happens to us and how we respond lies all our power. Harmful people thrive on reaction. Their words are often bait, crafted to provoke, destabilize, and pull you into their emotional storm. If they can get you to lash out, defend yourself desperately, or match their energy, they've succeeded. They've shifted the ground from their behavior to your reaction. Now, suddenly, the story isn't about what they did, but how angry or dramatic you became in response. When you choose to respond instead of react, you break the pattern, take back control of your behavior, and refuse to let someone else dictate who you become in that moment. There's a story about a Zen master and a young man who came to insult him. The young man hurled every cruel word he could think of, attacking the master's appearance, intelligence, and character. The master simply listened quietly and calmly. When the young man finally ran out of words, the master smiled and said, "If someone offers you a gift and you refuse to accept it, to whom does the gift belong?" The young man stood speechless. The gift of anger, insult, or provocation only becomes yours if you take it. If you don't, it stays with the person who tried to give it to you. When harmful people try to bait you, the best thing you can do is refuse to take the bait. This doesn't mean letting everything slide or becoming passive. It means choosing your response with intention, deciding who you want to be in that moment based on your values, not their behavior. Responding instead of reacting looks like taking a deep breath when insulted and choosing not to return it. It looks like calmly restating your boundary when someone tries to cross it instead of exploding in frustration. It looks like walking away from a harmful argument not because you're weak, but because your energy is too valuable to waste.
Emotional intelligence isn't about suppressing feelings, but mastering them. It's about recognizing, yes, I feel angry right now, without letting that anger take the wheel. It's about feeling hurt, but choosing healing over retaliation. Harmful people are often trapped in their own cycles of reaction, feeling attacked even when they're not, lashing out to defend wounds that have nothing to do with you. When you react, you become part of that cycle. When you respond thoughtfully, you rise above it, becoming a mirror not of their dysfunction, but of your own centeredness. One of the most powerful things you can learn is that not every provocation deserves your energy, not every comment needs a rebuttal, and not every slight requires an explanation. Some things can be met with silence, and some battles are won by refusing to fight. Imagine standing in front of someone throwing stones of anger, bitterness, and resentment, and instead of picking them up and throwing them back, you simply step aside, protecting your peace without needing to destroy theirs, showing strength not by overpowering, but by standing firm in who you are. Responding instead of reacting requires self-awareness and practice. You won't always get it right. There will be moments when the temptation to snap back is overwhelming, days when you react first and regret later. That's human. But every time you catch yourself, every time you choose the higher road, even when it's harder, you're strengthening a muscle that will serve you for life. It helps to prepare in advance. Harmful people often operate in patterns. If you know someone always tries to provoke you by questioning your competence, mocking your values, or belittling your choices, you can decide ahead of time how you'll respond. You can script it in your mind and practice it in your heart, so that when the moment comes, you're not scrambling, you're ready. A simple, calm phrase like, "I see it differently," or "Let's agree to disagree," or even, "I'm not going to engage in this conversation," can be incredibly powerful. Short, clear, firm, with no need to explain yourself endlessly or win them over. Your goal isn't to defeat the harmful person, but to stay true to yourself. When you learn to respond instead of react, you reclaim your time, peace, and dignity. You refuse to let someone else's chaos become your operating system, becoming the thermostat, not the thermometer, setting the temperature instead of reacting to it. Most importantly, you become someone you're proud of, because the real victory in dealing with harmful people isn't in outsmarting, outmaneuvering, or even changing them. It's in knowing that no matter what they do, they don't have the power to make you someone you're not. In that breath between stimulus and response, you have a choice. In that choice lies your growth, and in that growth lies a freedom no harmful person can ever take away.
When we encounter harmful people, our first instinct is often to try to fix them. We want to point out their flaws, show them the error of their ways, and explain, sometimes with great passion, how they're hurting others and even themselves. We imagine that if we just use the right words or argue hard enough, we can make them see the light. But here's the hard truth. You can't force someone to change, no matter how strong your logic or how righteous your anger feels. Real change doesn't come from force, it comes from inspiration and example. People don't learn from being told they're wrong, they learn from seeing a better way lived out in front of them. When we encounter harmful people, our first instinct is often to try to fix them. We want to point out their flaws, show them the error of their ways, and explain, sometimes with great passion, how they're hurting others and even themselves. We imagine that if we just use the right words or argue hard enough, we can make them see the light. But here's the hard truth. You can't force someone to change, no matter how strong your logic or how righteous your anger feels. Real change doesn't come from force, it comes from inspiration and example. People don't learn from being told they're wrong, they learn from seeing a better way lived out in front of them.
Imagine a lighthouse on a dark, stormy night. The lighthouse doesn't chase the ships, yell at them for being off course, or plead with them to turn around. It simply stands there, strong and steady, shining its light. Because of that unwavering presence, the ships find their way home. When you deal with harmful people, the smartest thing you can do is become a lighthouse. Stand firm in your values, live with kindness, respect, and integrity even when surrounded by those who don't. Your example becomes your message, your behavior your argument, and often, without even trying, you influence more people than you ever could by force. Leading by example means refusing to match harmful energy, maintaining your standards even when others lower theirs. If someone gossips, you don't join in. If someone lashes out, you stay calm. If someone plays dirty, you stay clean. You don't do it to be superior, but because that's who you are. People notice, maybe not right away or out loud, but they notice. Deep down, even the most harmful individuals can feel the contrast between chaos and calm, cruelty and kindness. Sometimes your presence alone can spark a quiet moment of reflection in someone who hasn't seen a better way modeled before. I once knew a manager who led one of the most dysfunctional teams in the company, backstabbing, blaming, finger-pointing everywhere. Instead of lecturing everyone about professionalism, she simply modeled it every day. She gave credit freely, listened more than she spoke, never participated in gossip, and made her expectations clear but delivered them with grace. Over time, the team's culture began to shift, not because she forced anyone to be better, but because she showed them what better looked like. We all have that power, whether we realize it or not. We're always leading someone by the way we live, treat people, and bring energy into a room. Harmful people aren't changed by arguments. They're changed, if they change at all, by seeing a different kind of strength than the one they're used to. There's a quiet authority in someone who doesn't need to shout to be heard, an undeniable credibility in someone whose actions consistently match their words, and the rare kind of influence in someone who holds themselves to a higher standard without demanding applause. Leading by example also protects you, keeping you aligned with your values even when tempted to sink to someone else's level. Harmful environments are contagious. If you're not careful, you can find yourself absorbing the very behaviors you despise, snapping back because you were snapped at, cutting someone down because you were cut down. Before you know it, you've become part of the very thing you swore you hated. But when you lead by example, you stay grounded, remembering who you are and what you stand for. No matter how harmful the people around you may be, you don't let them define you. It's important to understand that leading by example doesn't guarantee immediate results. Sometimes people will resist your example, mock it, resent it, or even attack it. Not everyone is ready to change or willing to look in the mirror you unintentionally hold up to them, and that's okay. The purpose of leading by example isn't to get everyone else to change. It's to stay true to yourself regardless of whether they do. It's to plant seeds even if you never get to see them grow, to trust that the way you choose to live matters even when it feels invisible.
Every act of integrity sends a ripple out into the world. Every moment of patience, every word of kindness, every time you choose dignity over pettiness, you're making a statement not just about who you are, but about what's possible. Sometimes, years later, you'll find out that someone was watching, someone who seemed unreachable, who, because they saw the way you handled yourself, found the courage to handle themselves differently. That's the real power of example. It doesn't shove or shame, it invites and inspires.
When dealing with harmful people, you can waste your energy trying to convince, argue, or outwit, or you can conserve your energy and simply show a different way. Live your values so clearly and consistently that others can't help but notice the difference. Be the lighthouse, steady and sure no matter how fierce the storm. In the end, the smartest way to lead isn't by forcing people to change, but by being the change they never saw coming. There's a quiet strength in knowing when it's time to walk away, not in anger or bitterness, but with grace, clarity, and a simple, powerful recognition that your peace is too valuable to trade for someone else's chaos. When dealing with harmful people, it's tempting to think that if you just hang in a little longer, be a little more patient or forgiving, they'll eventually see what they're doing. You tell yourself it's noble to endure, loyal to stay, and that quitting would mean you failed. But there's a difference between persistence and self-betrayal, between fighting for a relationship and fighting a losing battle with someone who doesn't want to change. The hardest truth to accept is that some people are committed to misunderstanding you, more invested in being right than being kind, and addicted to the drama they create because it gives them a sense of power. No matter how much compassion you show or how much you lower yourself trying to meet them where they are, it will never be enough, not because you're lacking, but because they're not ready. Walking away isn't a failure, it's an act of wisdom. The moment you realize that preserving your mental, emotional, and even physical health isn't selfish, it's essential. You can't pour into others from an empty cup or be your best self when constantly shrinking to survive someone else's toxicity. I once knew a man who spent years trying to repair a friendship with someone who constantly belittled, manipulated, and made him feel small. Every time he tried to address the issues, he was met with gaslighting and accusations that he was too sensitive or overreacting. He kept thinking, if I just explain myself better, stay calm enough, kind enough, patient enough, surely they'll understand. But they didn't because they didn't want to. The day he finally decided to walk away, he said he didn't feel anger but relief, not because he hated the other person, but because he finally chose to stop abandoning himself. Graceful exits aren't about making someone else the villain. They're about recognizing when a situation no longer serves your growth, choosing peace over proving a point, and stepping out of a battle you were never meant to win, because the cost of staying is your own becoming. Sometimes people will accuse you of being cold or heartless when you leave, especially harmful people who will twist the narrative to make you the problem because taking responsibility would require them to look inward, something they may not be ready to do. But you don't owe them your suffering to prove your loyalty. Your responsibility is to live in a way that honors your integrity, values, and future. There's something incredibly dignified about walking away quietly. No big speeches, no public declarations, just a silent acknowledgement between you and yourself that you deserve better, that your energy is better spent building, creating, loving, and growing, not constantly managing someone else's dysfunction. Walking away with grace also means letting go of the need for closure. Harmful people rarely give you the neat, clean ending you crave. They leave threads hanging, questions unanswered, and often leave without ever admitting the harm they caused. Waiting for them to validate your experience is like waiting for rain in a desert. You'll exhaust yourself hoping for something that will never come. Closure isn't something they give you. It's something you give yourself. The quiet decision to stop reopening a door that leads to nowhere. The willingness to write your own ending to the story, even if it's messy and unfinished, saying, "This chapter is over and that's enough." The truth is, walking away takes more strength than staying. Staying can feel noble because it's familiar and requires less immediate pain. Walking away demands facing the discomfort of the unknown, trusting that your worth isn't dependent on someone else's ability to recognize it, and believing that there's more ahead of you than behind you. When you walk away with grace, you're not just escaping toxicity, you're stepping into possibility, creating space for relationships that are mutual, respectful, and life-giving, making room for connections that don't require you to constantly explain your worth. Grace doesn't mean pretending the hurt didn't happen or denying the impact someone had on your life. It simply means choosing not to let that hurt define you, carrying the lessons, not the baggage, and leaving without bitterness, a need for revenge, or carrying the poison forward into the next chapter of your life. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is choose yourself, not in a selfish way, but in a sacred way, saying, I am responsible for protecting my spirit, guarding my peace, and writing the story of my life with intention and honor. There's power in knowing you can walk away from anything that costs you your dignity, freedom in realizing you don't have to stay tangled in someone else's mess to prove your goodness. Walking away isn't giving up, it's moving on, stepping into a life where you're no longer defined by the weight you carried for someone else, choosing to be a lighthouse, not an anchor. Sometimes, the smartest and most loving thing you can do for yourself, and even for the other person, is to walk away with grace, your head high, and your heart intact.